Hey everyone, it's Leanne here. Welcome to another video at my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to show you how I created another Father's Day card for my dad using the Dad and Me stamp set from Lawn Fawn. Now I have another card video showing an alternate card using this same stamp set, and I will link that in the video description below as well as in the video, and it will also be linked at the end of this video if you'd like to check it out. So here to begin, I'm just stamping at the elements that I'd like to use in my scene. Now I've already stamped my critters and they're colored, and I have an alternate video showing the coloring of those with Copic markers, and I'll link that in the video as well as the description below for you too. So for the mountains, I have stamped those using the Color Box ink pad and the Color Surf, and I've stamped out some rocks and some cattail, sort of cattail heads I guess they are, using Momento Tuxedo black ink. And here I have some grass tufts, and I'm going to stamp those using the Color Box ink pad in the color Moss Green. Now usually when I stamp things, I stamp quite a few just in case I need more elements than I anticipated, or if I just like to have a few extra on hand, so while I'm doing it, it's nice to pop out a few, and so I have those handy. So here I'm just positioning my elements on my card, just deciding how I want things to lay. I'd like to do a grass background, and I'm going to use the Grassy border die to cut that out with. So I'm just measuring or eyeballing how much grass I need and where that die should land on the paper, so I make sure to cut out enough with my die cutting machine. So once I have that, I'll run it through my Sizzix BIGkick, and the die pops out pretty easily. It's a really sweet machine. So here I have that all ready to go. And once again, I'll just check and see how much grass I cut out and where I want that to lay. And I really want the mountains and the grass to connect. So I'm just laying those out and deciding where I want that horizon line to be. I'm making a little mark on my card so that I can keep a note of that. And once again, I'm just double checking my elements, laying things out, making sure that the spacing is still good and everything is how I wanted it to be. Now to do the sky, I'm going to use some ink blending, and I'm using a Color Box ink pad in the color Robin's Egg. And so with my dabber, I'm very carefully adding ink in from the outer edges. I want to keep the center of the card and the base of that horizon line of that sky area all light, and work the darker colors pushed out towards the edges. So once I have that ready, I'll add my mountains back in on that line that I drew. So I'm just adding these with 2-way tape. I'll start by adding this mountain in the background on the center part first, and then I'll position my other mountains around it equally on each side. So I'm just eyeballing this and lining it up and trying to get everything where I want it to be. The X-Acto knife is pretty handy. I didn't realize how much I use this tool, but I use it for quite a lot of things. And here I'm just able to nudge the mountains just softly, just a little bit, to make sure they're exactly in the spot that I want them. And here these guys were overhanging on the edge a bit, so I just pushed them in and they still looked okay, overlapping like they are. And again, that X-Acto knife comes in pretty handy. So once I have those where I want them, I push them down in place. And for the grass, I'm going to put that on the card using foam tape. Now, my reasoning for this is I want to elevate that and create a strong dimension between the grass blades and the mountains. Typically, when you're looking at a scene, grass blades aren't the same size as the mountains, of course. But I thought by adding the foam tape and giving that dimension and that shadow from the grassy border edge falling on the mountain, it really gave that sense of depth and really pushed those mountains farther in the background and made you feel like the grass area was where you were. So I'm just eyeballing this as well. I've got the foam tape down, and I'm placing the grass where I want it to be and where I want it to connect with the base of the mountains. Here I'm just trimming off the edges of the grass and matching it up with the edges of the card so that I get a nice clean edge. I'm using my X-Acto knife and ruler. If you're using this technique for a ruler, I would recommend using a metal ruler with a cork back. I usually flip my ruler upside down so that there's no wiggle room between the ruler and the paper for my knife to move around. It gets a nice straight edge. So here once again I'm positioning my elements just one more time to make sure that they are where I want them to go and that the spacing is still good with the background elements that I have laid down. Because sometimes I find when you're adding item by item, things can shift a little bit, lines get a little bit pushed around, and sometimes you lose space in areas and gain it in others, and I just want to make sure that everything is fitting correctly. Now for this here, I did try adding some tufts of grass. I was going to build it up all the way around the pond, but I found that it took away from the main characters, so I decided to just do some grass on each side of the pond. So I'm just laying that down with some white glue. And so for my first item, I wanted to make sure to include a cattail in my card. So I have a connection with cattails. In the house that my dad lives in, that I grew up in as a child, we had a swamp beside the house and we had cattails. And for whatever reason, I was terrified of those cattails. And I remember one day, my cousin was outside and she was chasing me with a cattail and I was screaming, and my dad came out and he gave her proper to do, and I look back on that now and I just laugh, and I don't know why I was so scared of cattails, but I think it's kind of funny, and we have that sort of connection. So I thought it would be cute to make sure I include a cattail in my scene. So now for the pond, I'm just going to add that with 2-way tape. I'm keeping all of these items flush to the paper. I'm not adding any foam tape to elevate them or anything. So I'm making sure when I add this pond to get it centered and just kind of eyeballing it up and making sure that it hits the tufts of the grass at the bottom and sits with enough room for my sentiment at the bottom as well. Now I decided to put some rocks in this picture too. I think they're mainly meant for the mountains, but I thought that it would add a nice dimension in the foreground around the pond. So I'm just adding some white glue to those as well. Now I find that white glue is kind of a love-hate medium. It can take a long time to dry, it can be messy, but I find that it's better than using tapes, foam tapes and that sort of thing, because with white glue it's a lot easier to work with smaller pieces to get a full coverage of the back of that piece. And it's also nice because you have a little bit of freedom. Once you lay it on the paper, you can nudge it around a bit, so you're not totally locked into where you put it as soon as you lay it down on the paper. So here I'm just sizing the fisherman's hat and finding out where the bear head sits behind that hat. And I'm just going to add a little bit of glue there as well, just to tack that down. And this way, by adding it to the bear, I can take my time and make sure that it's put on correctly and positioned the way I want, instead of having to fuss with it on the artwork later. And I use my X-Acto knife to carry it over to the bear, and that way I can really line it up and then just slide it off the end of the knife. And I can make sure that the hat is where I want it, which is just over top of the bear ears, and it seems to work well in that spot. Now for my critters, I've decided to put foam tape on them so that they lift off the paper and there are more of the foreground elements. So I've just positioned those back on the page again to make sure that the spacing is correct. I'm putting down the big bear first because I want him to be positioned, because he will dictate the space that the other items have, and I want to make sure that that's laid down first. Then I'm putting down the baby bear, and I've put the baby bear a little bit lower on beside the dad bear so that they're not on the same line. It's creating a little bit more movement through the picture. And then with my fish, I have him breaking the line between the pond and the grass area. And so what this does is it ties in those two elements. So the bears and the pond and the fish are all one image. Visually, you look at them as a whole. You don't look at the bears and then the water and the fish. So I just practiced some lines at the side of my page, and I'm ready to draw some lines for my fish showing him jumping out of the pond, and then just some ripples in the water too, to show where he jumped out of the water. Now to do this, I'm using a Micron pen. It's a 01 liner. Micron pens are pretty amazing. They're an archival ink, and they're a rich black, so they complement the Tuxedo black ink nicely. And that's what I'm using here to stamp my sentiment on with. So I've decided to go with the sentiment, "You're officially awesome," which is pretty cute. So I have a piece of cardstock, and I'm just eyeballing that up and centering it, and just laying it down so that I can trim this out and use this as a sentiment across the bottom. An alternate way to do this could be to also heat emboss this using a white powder, a white embossing powder. Because that background, that green grass is so dark, that would also work here. But because I don't have a heat gun, I've decided to just create a border for this. So I put 2A tape on that, and it's adhered as well. And now I'm just setting up the dad stamp, and I'm going to put that up in the sky as the main part of the card, the first thing you would read. So I'm just eyeballing that as well, deciding where the center is. Now the thing with centering is, I know it's habitual to want to use a ruler to find the center, and in design school they teach you quite a bit on how to eyeball things, but I also have a rule of thumb that as humans, when we look at things, we don't look at things with a ruler, we look at them with our eye, and I think if you think that they look with center, then it's fine enough, because that's how people will see them anyways. So once I was done the card, I felt like it was nice, but it wasn't me, because the bear didn't feel like a girl bear. So I decided to draw her a little bow to put on her. So very carefully I cut this out, and when I was cutting it out, I made sure to maintain a white edge around the outside of the bow. Now I did that because the stamps that I have, once they're run through the die cutting machine, those have a white edge around them. So I wanted this to feel like it fit in with my scene and wasn't a separate element. So I very carefully cut a white edge around that bow. It was a little tricky because you have a tendency to want to lean in towards the black line. But I was able to get that pretty good. And then if there were any edges on my cuts, if it was a little sharp on corners, I just very slightly nicked those with the edge of the knife. So I put a little bit of white glue on that bow, and I've laid it down on top as well. And I found that really made a difference. So now I do have a masculine looking card, but it's from a girl. And so my little bear looks like a girl bear. So just to finish it off, I took a Wink of Stella pen in the shade Clear, and I put it on the base of the fish, as well as on the hat band, on the fisherman hat, and a little bit on the bow. So it ties my main 3 elements together. And there you have it, my Father's Day card for my dad. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. At the end of the video, there will also be a link where you can view my other Father's Day card that I created using the same stamp set. If you did like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and be sure to subscribe so you're notified as more videos are posted. Thanks guys so much for watching.